Here. Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. I believe we had last Friday, we did some stuff where we wanted to be able to edit some debug values, and we had a little bit of work to do to make that happen. Essentially what needed to occur there was the debug values needed to be, if an edit was going to occur, that edit needed to be stored as something in the debug system that could then be picked up later by the debug output code when it sort of sweeps through, and knows when it can actually overwrite debug values. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. Today is day 252, so if you're following along at home, you want to unpack day 251 source code, and that is what I am starting with today. I'm going to open up 4Coder here and load our project. Let's go ahead and do that, handmade.prj. And I do wonder, I don't actually know if it would work for me to not include the total paths here, because I suppose it might be nice for people to not have to have the total paths, but I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe someday we'll make it relative, project files relative, once I have some time to maybe play around with the 4Coder thing and ensure that that actually works, because I don't know exactly how we're treating those internally. So anyway, where we were with the debug stuff before was we had it listing here, and we can go in and we can see everything getting filed properly, including our non-existent profile window that we want to re-enable, and we have a bunch of stuff here that we can click on as well. But all of these things are not actually editable at the moment, so if we go to click on them, nothing actually happens. They don't highlight, even though we have code in there to do stuff like that. And so the problem is, if we were to actually edit these values, the values themselves need to get set somehow, and right now we have no way to actually do that. So because the debug values exist in the debug system sort of as copies of the data that was written out in some frame at some point, but that doesn't tell the debug system where it would actually go to write individual values if it wanted to change one. So what we need to do if we want this to work is when someone edits a value, we have to let them edit the value. But once they edit the value, we need to just store the fact that it was edited, and then later on when someone comes through and actually does an operation to output that same value again, it wants to be able to get back at that point a change that it can apply. So that's really what we're looking to do here, and that's a little bit complicated, right? Because essentially what has to happen is there's a GUID here that these things are sort of hashed by, right? What we have to do is look up using the GUID and see whether or not the value that we're looking for is what we, it has an edit pending on it. And so you can see that I started to do that here. I just put a to-do in there. I basically just made a piece of code that sort of says, well, we're going to have to call the debug system, and we're going to have to say if you wanted to edit it, now would be a good time to edit it. You can see the debug handle value edit piece of code here is passing the address of that value. And so by passing the address of that value, that is what allows us to actually write into it at the very moment when it's actually being outputted. So it will log what the value was, and then it will give the debug system a chance to overwrite it. Now, I don't know that we actually want to do specifically what I've written here, and the only reason I say that is because, well, the debug system at this point may not want to have a ton of different calls into it to edit every different possible value. It may just want to do something like return a union, right, which has the different values in it that we can copy over. So one way we could tackle this instead would be something like, okay, maybe there's just one call which is like debug get updated event, and that takes this debug name that we've got here, which I think I could probably also sort of consider locally. Like I could do something like this, where I say like name, and then I grab the name so that we can use that a little more clearly, right? So there's this is like the debug GUID, basically. In fact, I suppose I should just call it the debug GUID, because that's what it really actually is. So if I have the debug GUID, I can go in here and I can say, record the debug event with that GUID. And then also, like, I can use that GUID to say, please look up what the actual value is. And if you get one back, then I could use it. So maybe what I would say here is, you know, debug event star updated event equals that. So I've grabbed it. And then I can say if updated event, then I want to overwrite the existing event with the new event, right? So I want to say something like, you know, event. I don't know if we have a way to do the entire data block. So probably, how would that work exactly? So it would probably be something like this. We'd say get updated event. You know what? I guess I really don't have to do that. I could just do it this way. I could just say like debug edit event, and I just pass the event that I was using. And that is actually just, since it doesn't have to take different kinds of things, that would actually be fine. It'll take the event and it can write into it as necessary. So I take it back. That's really not necessary. You can still use just one entry point. This entry point doesn't have to be specialized on which type of value we're editing. It can just take the event, and then internal to that, it can do whatever it needs to do. So that actually should be fine. And that way it knows which one we're talking about, and then it has the actual event itself. I presumably would want to pass a pointer to the event, which is, I think, what event already is. So I think that's really all I probably need. Now, that entry point needs to be defined somewhere in the debug system. And I don't really know the include order for the debug system at this point. So you may have to put a function prototype for this in here, because unlike everything else, which is just streaming out, and you know, remember, all of our debug stuff is made to just stream out into a buffer, which then gets looked at by the debug system after the fact. This, because it has to happen right at this time, because that's the only time when this value may even be valid, right? Yeah, at that point, we sort of need the ability to handle it. You know what? We still do need one more thing, right? We still do need the ability to copy back out of the appropriate union portion here, because we're going to have this value, and this value needs to actually get set still. So we still do, I think we really do need to do this, but we can do it externally, right? And then there's, we don't have to add entry points for it, but we are going to have to do basically this exact same thing, I think. I don't really see any other way to do it, right? So, just trying to think of the most efficient way to do it. You see what has to happen here, right? After we record the value of the event, which is right here, and that's writing directly into the debug buffer, we then want to have some way of setting the event to a new value. And that includes needing to pass it back to the program, which means that whatever this value actually was, whatever type of variable it was, we need to be able to write a line of code that looks like this. Or something, right? Where this is the correct type. It's the type of thing C++ makes very difficult for no real reason. And so the only real way to do that, as far as I know, you know, is to basically sort of overload the, to make another set of overloaded functions that does the setting, right? That does something like debug, you know, value set, or you know, say get event data or something like this, where we then say like, okay, we've got the event, and then we're going to pass the address of the value, something like this, you know, and that way we can have one of those that writes back to it. And it's just a lot of meaningless typing for no real reason, but yeah, that's just kind of what you have to do. So if we did something like that, then we would do, you know, it would just be like, okay, whatever the event, oops. whatever the event's value was, that's what this thing is going to take, right? So yeah, I feel like that's annoying, but only a little bit, right? Because it's really just a series of these things here that sort of bust out the values we actually need. Oops, that was not what I meant to do at all. I want to cut and paste this. So if I did that set event value, I can then do it for whatever these guys are. Let's go ahead and change that U32 to a V2. And same thing here. And here. And here. Not sure why that one didn't replace properly. What happened there? I'm kind of curious what happened there. Because that one worked properly, right? Replaced both instances of the v4. And I must have typed something stupid. So let's paste it here. Here's v4, rectangle 2. V4, rectangle 2. That's weird. So that seems like a bug as well. I'm not sure what the bug actually is, because it works most of the time. But in that particular case, it looks like it didn't replace the V4. But I don't know why. Right? Let's see. Bug where replace in region doesn't seem to replace all the occurrences in the region. Yeah. Not a huge deal. We can always just do this and work around it. But it is a little odd. I don't think I've seen that before. I'm not sure why it happened. And see, there it just worked totally fine. So it's something very specific. I'm not sure what. And there it worked. See, it worked totally fine. So most of the time it just works. Maybe I got confused and typed something weird. I'm not sure. That happens. But hey, we've got a video of it, so I can go back and look. Which is, I guess, the best way to do bug repos. We actually can reproduce bugs with 4Coder 100% accurately because I can watch exactly what I did on stream. So I don't have to give one of those bug reports. It's like, I don't know, I was using the thing and some things happened and then it broke. Which is always fun for people to get on the other end of the tech support where they're like, okay, thanks for that. That's great. I'll get right on that. So I think that would work. At least I assume it would. Do not know why that didn't give me an error because I should not have been able to compile something with debug edit event in there like that. Did we turn off? We couldn't have turned off. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. We could not have turned it off because we wouldn't be seeing it. So we know that we are still running with Handmade internal, and that is definitely true. I'm just looking at it right there. So why aren't we getting a debug edit event link error? Did I like already define that function in some kind of weird like premonition thing that happened? No, I didn't. So what's going on? Do I want to know? Handmade debug interface.h1. There's two of these. So maybe this is what the bug was. Is there something weird about, is there some thing confusing about the fact that there's two buffers? Suppose I kill one. It killed both of them, so they were both viewing the same buffer. Let's load it back in. And it's got that 1 on it again. And it looks like, so yeah, that just like, it doesn't seem to want to actually let me edit this buffer, but I have no idea why. I'm very confused right now. Because like, now the buffer's gone. If I do this, I can switch to it. And now I've got another one, I guess. But yeah, I'm not sure. I guess because I hit Z, I must have hit Z instead of B, and then it loaded the same buffer twice. I don't know. No idea. I mean, this is just kind of what you would expect. This is the growing pains of, you know, an editor that's in alpha, that's in pre-alpha state. So, you know, that is certainly to be expected, but to say the least, I have absolutely no idea what exactly was going on there. So yeah. But I don't actually think it's too much of a problem because, again, I think all we really need to do is just do this, which is not particularly hard, and it should work. So let's just do one of these, right? Looks like that. And before I spend the time actually making the other ones, I want to make sure I can actually save and build the file and all that stuff. So when I call debug value now, and I do record debug event, and I do set value event data, now in here I want to be able to do, you know, that creates the event. I want to be able to do something where I do debug value get event data, and I'm going to pass the address of the value there and the event like so. Now, I can't even just do it just like that and not actually have the edit take place at all. So we'll just start with that, get rid of this, get rid of that, and of course in here it would do the same thing. It would then just do a star value, or rather value equals event value b32, right? Again, those literally don't do anything, they just reassign the value back, but so I can just make sure that this is working at all. So there we go. Okay, so it can't convert, and that's great. That's exactly what we want. It basically said like, hey, you don't have ones for the type that you were just talking about. So I think that's good. I think that, so that must have been the problem, I guess, was that I just had multiple buffers. So bug where opening the same buffer produces like, or opening same buffer with open file leads to a confusing situation where you don't know what you're editing or something. I have no idea. So that's definitely not something you would ever want to have actually happen. Like in order to get in the situation that I got in where you might, because you could totally lose a lot of work that way, right? So we need some way of making sure that that never happens. If you open a file that's already open, you should have to take extraordinary measures to get a second copy of that file in memory, because then when you save them, they're gonna overwrite each other, right? So I definitely need to like protect against that, which maybe I could do in my own thing, but that's probably best protected inside 4Coder directly, because I think in general people would never want that to happen unless they explicitly ask for it in some very like, you know, very like dramatic confirmation-oriented way that that couldn't go wrong accidentally. You can also see if this still happens, the edit thing, where it wasn't replacing when I got to rectangle 2, if that still happens. So weird! That's so weird! So that is still a bug. I don't know what that is. Bug where replacing... It's like only that v4 with the rectangle 2 only replaces some instances. That's just super strange. I'm really curious what that one is. It must have something to do with what the strings are? I guess? because it only happens in that one circumstance. Like, we've never seen it before. It's very reliable because we just did it exactly again in a totally different edit scenario. And then everything else works right. That's so bizarre. That must be a very, very interesting, like, little corner case or something. Oops, it's not font ID, font ID. All right, now let's compile. So what are we missing here? We are missing, trying to show, like, entity type star. Entity type star. Oh, is it having trouble converting that to something that it knows how to edit? Why was it not having trouble converting it the other way? Oh, because it's an address of. So we probably need to do something, you know, where this is actually getting used in a different way, I guess. Yeah, that one's a little problematic because the entity type's going to be an enum. And so if you want to pass it, it will be able to convert itself. Yeah, so that's a little tricky. Does that perhaps mean that these should be ampersand? Well, that wouldn't help because making it a reference, I don't think C++ is any smarter about how that works with making it a reference. Yeah, I'm not sure how I would work around that really. I don't have a lot of good ideas for that. I mean, short of actually making one for entity type. Let's see here, compilation and Win32 render. So those are basically like enum problems, if that makes sense. And I don't know any real way to get around that. Because the problem is, while it's fine when I call debug value this way round, I can't really pass address here. So, well, you know, I suppose I could do something more like this. Then it would sort of bug me about the cast, though. So it still wouldn't quite help, right? Because it wouldn't allow me to take like a U32 return type, for example, and change it to a value. So I don't know how exactly I would get that to work. I mean, I guess we could do something like this, which is absolutely absurd. But, you know, C++ is kind of absolutely absurd. That's the kind of language it is. So I suppose you could do something like this, where you were like, hey, I'm going to pass you the value, and then I pass you the destination. Like, this is basically ignored, right? And then I would just say, like, oh, okay, well, trust me, it's an R32, so, like, just actually write it that way. That's hilarious. Hilarious. Oops, don't need to do that. Or rather, it would be hilarious if it weren't for the fact that it's so depressing. But yeah, I can do that, right? So I can just come in here and say, like, okay, you know, ignored, 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 ignored. And that would do it, right? So, all right. I guess I'll go with that. Why not? So this guy needs to actually have the right cast, though. So let me stick that in there quickly. And compile first to make sure it works okay. Illegal indirection, yeah. So that looks fine. So should be good. That's a V2 star. This is a V3 star. This is a V4 star. And my rectangle 2 star. A rectangle 2 star is born. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the rectangle to rectangle 3, and bitmap ID and sound ID. All right. So now we can get and set debug data, so that's fine. And so really all we would have to do in the middle of those two things is now insert the call that I was talking about before, which is like debug edit event data. And that just gives, that would pass whatever that debug name is. So we've got the GUID, and it would take that event and say, go ahead, and if you want to update the event, update it before I rewrite this value. That's really all I'm talking about. So the same thing would happen here with the Boolean situation. Debug name pound value. And yeah, that's going to be a GUID. And then right here, before we do that one, we would do the same thing. So now these code passes are the same. So I think that's really, oops, that's not good. So I think that's all we really need, and we just need debug edit event data to now actually exist, which is the part we need to write inside debug.cpp. And so that's going to be the one that's like does the hash situation. So when we, where is that guy? It's in here somewhere. Not quite there yet. No, no, no. So here's store event. It's get element. It's get element from it. That's the one I'm looking for. That one. So get element from event is actually the part that I need. So when it does the name parse, right, and it produces that hash value, that's actually the part that I need. Which also kind of means at that point too, we can, if we want to, just store just the hash value, right? We could hash the GUID ahead of time and just write the hash value in now, I guess. Well, we need to do the matching. I guess what I should say is we could write the pointer to the debug element in if we needed to now, because we're already doing that work on the pass through it. So yeah, because you can kind of see that we're gonna have to do this work when we set, because unless we do that work, we'll have no way of actually knowing if this thing was edited. And so once we've actually done that work by looking at the GUID, it seems silly to do it a second time in the debug system, but yeah. So anyway, if we want to do that, that's kind of annoying, but again, this is just for debug output values. It's not for profiling. We don't ever have to actually take a hit for any profiling-based code. So presumably it's fine to do it, to put these debug values in here, because we can always turn them off if we don't want to have them. So for example, the debug data block stuff could, if we wanted to, just turn off, and then we wouldn't have that problem, right? We wouldn't, the debug data block could say, I just don't want to record any of these values, and that's something that we could actually probably make happen. Yeah. So anyway, I'm a little nervous about that. It's a little bit nerve-wracking, and it does make me wonder if maybe, storing the pointer to write to would be something to do. If we did that, though, we can't ever pick these things up again, and that's kind of unfortunate. And we also couldn't do anything like having the data block control it, so it's really tough to say. Because we could just decide that the only values we can edit are ones that can provide stable pointers, which would be fine for the kinds that we're trying to edit right now, which are just like Boolean values that you toggle on and off, because those Boolean values aren't going to disappear. Whereas if we want to edit these, we need some way of actually accessing these specifically. And in order to do that, I don't actually know. Yeah, I don't actually know any other way that we could do it. So I think we will have to do that. So let's just try it, I guess, and then we'll see. We'll see if we have any problems with it in terms of like speed-wise or anything like that. Since we're calling it for a small number of things, I suppose we don't have to be too worried. But it always just makes me a little bit nervous because I would rather have the debug system just write things to a buffer and forget about them. I don't like the idea of it doing like a ton of work, right? I don't like the idea that it's going to sit there and do, you know, a bunch of work. So all right, let's take a look. That would just be debug edit event data, and debug edit event data. It's going to take the GUID in. It's going to take the debug event in, and what it would do is it would say, well, you know, I want to do the exact same thing I was doing here. So I want to get the parsed name out, and then I want to look up, you know, this piece. I guess to make it easier there, I could probably just take this part out. In fact, this could just be something that expands in line. This would be the debug element where this code here, if you actually already have a hash index, like so, you can do just this part here. Oops. So yeah, if you pass in the index directly, and I suppose you could even just pass in the hash value and assume that no one, you know, everyone's going to probably just get it from parsed name. So you're going to pass in the hash value that you've already gotten, then it will go ahead and map it into the hash. It'll try to find it, and if it finds it, it'll return it. So that is that. And this would just take parse name hash value. All right. So this guy can do the same thing now, which is good. And if it gets something back, then it can go from there. Now, it needs a way to get the debug state out. And so that's like a thing that only sometimes actually exists, right? Because you may be in a situation where it hasn't really started up yet. So we need to call this thing with the global debug memory. So, right, oops, don't quite want to go that far. So it's this one right here, and this may not actually return a debug state. So we don't want to like assume that we can get one of those. We just want to see if we can get one of those. Like so. So yeah. But you can see, hopefully you can see why I'm worried about this. Like, this is a really expensive operation, right? I have to find the debug state first, which is not too much. But then I have to go through and like parse the name out and like match it with the hash value. I could, you know, make something that's faster that gets the hash value, but regardless of, even no matter what I do, going through that, you know, series of things is going to take a while, getting that hash value. And then I've got to match it against other strings to make sure that I've got the right one. That's just really, really expensive. And so it moves debug value from something that we could probably call with fairly reckless abandon to something that is actually relatively concerning. And I don't love that. So it does sort of suggest to me that it's not maybe the best thing in the world, but I don't really know if much we could do other than say you've got to store the pointer into the event and then it'll try to edit it, and if it's not there anymore, you'll crash, or who knows what you'll do. Which is also not fabulous, so I don't know. It's kind of one of those situations where I'm not sure there's all that much you could do to improve it. Again, if you've got metaprogramming, then all this goes away because you just write permanent values in there that you could just hard index directly, like we almost had with the counters, but of course we couldn't quite do that because it was sort of this really janky, it was really very janky, especially when you have more than one translation unit. But what are you going to do? you do the best you can in C++. It's always a little bit of a try to do the least bad solution because the good solution is never actually available to you. So if we go ahead here and do debug event data, and we get a result back, then at that point we can do a relatively cheap operation. So once we've done all that heavy work, then it's actually not so bad. But unfortunately, it was just getting up to that point where we actually know the value that's the difficult part. So if we have an actual debug element, then we can store whatever we want in here. So we can store, for example, just some very simple Boolean, something like, value was edited. Oops. Something like that. Where we just look and say, oh, okay, if the value was edited, then I'm going to actually replace the contents of the debug event that I was given with like the most recent debug event that I saw, because that's the one that I actually want, that's what I actually want to have happen. So that would be something like, okay, if there's not a result, if I got a result, I'd say if the value was edited, then this event that I've been passed in, just overwrite it with whatever the most recent event was. And I also know I can assert here that the most recent event is an actual valid value because, if somebody's set value was edited, there had better have been a most recent event to edit. I guess another thing I could do is, if we just want to be extra safe in the case of like when things are getting cleaned up or something, I could also do this and say, okay, if you say the value is edited, there also has to be a most recent event. When there is a most recent event, then off we go. Either way, we've observed the edit now. So I'm just going to say that that clears out anybody who was going to look for this event again should not get a second edit. We only want to edit like one value, right? The next time through, we don't want to re-edit the value. So I believe we want it to remain roughly like this. Now this has to actually exist, this call has to exist in the debug interface. So before we call it, obviously we need to announce it like so. And let's see here. What is this? That is the GUID, so we need to pass that, obviously. So that's going to just be event GUID, and in this case, the same. There we go. That's not quite correct. I admit that because I believe that's a stored event, which means that this is actually going to be that. Illegal indirection, also true. I don't deny it. And then in here, where we do the element hash, okay, so I do actually need to do this outside of getElement. So the hash value, this part right here, I suppose would be nice if it was computed outside. So it's not actually done twice. If that's the case, we would need to do it in two different places, right? We'd need to do it here and here. And then this would pass in the index, like so. Which I could, I suppose parse name could also do that, but I don't know whether I want to do that or not. So I'm going to say that this actually passes the index in directly now, like so. And we'll leave it like that. So this is just parsed name, hash value, and same here. Oops. Can't see where that is. But I can guess. Declared but not defined. Okay, so that is true, actually. I believe you. Because there's going to be a call from that from the... there's going to be a call from that from the platform layer. right? Which is also not great. You can see why that happens, right? Anybody inside handmade.cpp can call this just fine. But anyone who's in the platform layer can't because it's inside the DLL. So the platform layer, if it wants to announce a debug value, which we want it to do, it can write to the buffers just fine, but it has no way of actually invoking that call. So it can invoke that call if it actually has the game loaded, but it can't evoke the call if it doesn't have the game loaded. Now, again, not really a huge deal because it's possible for us to patch through that. But again, it's just another thing that I really don't like about the way this is unfolding. I don't know how else I would make that system operate anymore. Yes, I do. That was a lie I was about to say there. I think I do know how this would work. Okay. Okay. Are you ready for this? Because this is ridiculous. So, if I am editing a value, then one thing I do generally know is the debug system only really has to edit one value at a time. Probably forever, but even if we did want to edit more than one value, it wouldn't be ridiculous for us to then just only edit one of those per frame. If we had to do 5, it takes 5 frames to edit the 5 debug values. But in general, we're only ever interacting with one value. You know, we go up on the thing and we like slide values around or something like that. We're only ever editing one value. What that means is we could instead just have one place where the debug system basically latches and says, here is the event that's getting overwritten. And then it never has to actually look at the hash value or the elements or any of those things. Never has to spend any time hashing, never has to do anything. It can just look to see if the 2 pointers for the GUIDs match. Because we know that the edit doesn't have to survive across a DLL reload, so that's not a problem, because you're only editing on the same frame that you're actually on. And so we could just say, forget about this entirely, right? Does not matter. Okay, that's gone. We go back here and we say, okay, in the debug interface code, when we're actually going to do debug edit event data, instead we don't really call anything at all, right? We never actually call it. Instead, we would just do... I guess we could almost just use debug value set event data just by itself, right? We could just say that it looks like that, okay? Okay. So if we did this, we would be able to get rid of all of these. So now we only have one. We only have one of these happening, right? So essentially it would look like this. This is so crazy, but I kind of like it. So we'd be calling debug value set event data, and it would be passing in something like this, right? It would be like value and or source and dest, something like that. So we would say like, okay, we're gonna set the value to the source value, and then we're gonna set the dest value to whatever comes back here, right? So I think what we do here is we say, okay, we know we want to set the event type, and then we want to do an if statement to see whether or not we've been edited. If we have been edited, we do this. If we haven't been edited, we do this, right? So either we write the source into the event that we have, or we get the dest out of the other event. One or the other. Seems relatively straightforward. In fact, I think we can clean this up even further. So all we need is some global pointer that is the global debug value, and then we can always just pull that out of the system fairly trivially. It still means that we do have to negotiate one pointer with the platform layer, but I think that's it. And then this becomes almost free again, like it was before. So what we would do right here is we'd say debug global edit event, or something like this. We'd say if the global if the debug global edit event squid equals this event squid, just the pointers, no string, so we just do one single comparison, then we know that we're being edited, and so we would take whatever the value is that's in that event that corresponds to what type we are, and we'd write it back to our destination. That's it, right? And then at that point, we could also just equivalently do the reverse and say, okay, at that point afterwards, we always write back, let's say, what the value is. So maybe this thing doesn't even get used anymore. This is just like the type handler. That's just an automatic type thing. And I guess we could leave it as ignored. It's just to figure out the type. And this is the actual value. What do you think of that? I feel like it's crazy town, but it seems like it's better than all the other stuff. Right? So now we just have just one if, and we have complete editing capabilities after that to edit all the values without actually ever having to store a pointer to them, so they can be transient values if they need to be. Meaning they can be inside like a simulation entity where you've unpacked something and you're doing stuff to it. It can pick up and edit even directly into that, which is something that doesn't even exist by the time the debug system runs later on and is processing the user interface, which seems kind of cool. So if we were to do that, this would be the new format for everything. We would have to have one of these for each, but I think that's all we would really actually need. I don't see a lot of downsides to that. That seems really good to me. I like that. And I also think that presumably, I feel like since the only difference here is the type parameter, I feel like, and I'm not sure why we didn't do this originally, I feel like it would be relatively easy here to just do, you know, some kind of thing that was like a macro, right? That just said like, what's the type? And then this whole thing is actually just macroized on that. Right? So we can just say like, all right, yeah, you know, we've got one of these, and that's like for R32, and that way we just don't have to type it like a billion times all the time. And there really aren't that many places where we even need to know, right? So they're pretty straightforward. Something like that. And so that means then we can just say like, oh, okay, there's, you know, however many there are of these. We can just put them in here. So we know we've got, and I guess I can just say interface up here, whatever they are, right? There's B32, R32, U32, S32, V2. Although I guess I don't know if I can actually do B32. That one might have to be special cased because it's the Boolean one. So there's that bitmap ID. So that one might complain, and we'll take a look at that in a second. And then all this stuff just goes away. Oops, not quite that much. Yeah. So there we go. So debug global edit event is just like, you know, an extern here, debug global edit event. And let's see. And I suppose, in some sense, maybe we can't really make this a non-pointer. You know, ideally it wouldn't be a pointer; it would just be an actual one of these. But I don't think there's really any way to do that because we need the pointer to point into the platform layer. If we didn't have to worry about the platform layer accessing it, then in theory it wouldn't have to. But I think that has to be the case. So yeah, so the B32 one can't actually do its thing, right? It has to not. That has to not be the case because it's, you know, it's a problem. All right, so debug edit event data. Wait, we need to clean up what the actual macro is calling now. It's debug value set event data. There is no edit event data anymore. So this is like debug value set event data. That's exactly what this one has to call as well. So this has to call debug value set event data, and presumably that could just be done with an R32 dummy, right? So like R32, you know, like that, right? Or I guess maybe just an S32 dummy, something like that, and that would work. None of the 11 overloads convert all the argument types while trying to match the list. Okay, well, how about that? Isn't there one of those? There should be. Or rather, that should be. Why is there not an S32 and a void star? I thought there was. Right? There should be an S32 and a void star right there. And in fact, it's listed. Ah, I see. Because we're still passing the wrong thing to it. My bad. It's actually that. Yeah, so we don't need to store this GUID anymore either, so this actually, I think, doesn't have to be here. This can go back to the way it was, where it's only ever done this way, and that's good. Same here. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, so this, since this set, if we actually call this, this will actually overwrite the type field though, which is kind of annoying. So I feel like this also has to be done like sort of in that order, if that makes sense. And so I think that probably has to look like that. We'll take a look though. So there we go. Now that I think that actually, yeah, that was kind of crazy. I hadn't really thought of that before. It's a bit weird, but I think it's relatively reasonable. So if we now define this thing, we can define it to point to something inside the debug system. So in handmade debug.cpp, we can have this value. I don't know if we actually define any other debug things here. I think we used to, but I think we kind of got rid of them all. Didn't we? So there's not really, it's all just part of the debug state now, I think. But I could be wrong about that. Nope, it's not. So here we go. This thing here has to get defined, and we'd be doing exactly the same thing that we did before, where we say like, okay, there's a debug event, and this is the global edit event underscore, and this is going to be equal to the global edit event underscore. So that would be the way we would initialize that. So everything there is fine, and then the only problem is our Win32 subsystem doesn't have a way of getting that. And you can see that it's exactly analogous to the global debug table situation. It's the exact same thing. So since that already exists on the other side, I wonder, could I just make that, I wonder if I can just sort of piggyback on top of that, if you will. So for example, inside the interface layer, since I know I'm already handling that debug table, if I take a look at the debug table definition, what I could do is say, well, I've got all this gigantic array of events anyway. Why don't I just have at the top debug event, like, you know, edit event, something like that? Because then I wouldn't even need to worry about treating it any differently. It can just, you know, it can just live at the top of that thing. Because global debug table arrow, the event, is actually now the thing that I need. So that seems pretty compelling, actually. I like that a lot. So I think that's what I actually want. So instead of a debug global edit event, I think I would just do this, right? And so it's a little pointer chasey, but it's okay because getting the GUID out of it after that is a hard reference. It's not actually following a pointer at that point, right? This is a dot, and this is a dot. So it's really just that one jump still. So it's not, doesn't seem problematic. And then I wouldn't have to worry because the global debug table is always handled everywhere. So that's pretty satisfying. I like that a lot. Now if I run, in theory, nothing should get edited because right now none of those values are being placed at all. And so now I think we're in good shape, right? Because now all we have to do is set that event, and when we set that event, the edit will occur. So for example, if we now go in here to handmade debug.cpp, how much time I got? 3 minutes. Okay. If I go in here and actually set an edit event, then let's see here. Where do we actually do that? Auto modify. So auto modify variable, I can't see it because it's behind my head. Maybe I should switch over here. Debug.cpp. Auto modify. Auto modify variable, auto modify variable. So here we go. So we got like toggle value. So let's just, I assume that toggle value is currently nerfed. Yeah. So this toggles the actual value inside the event itself. So I think all we have to do, don't quote me on this, but I think all we have to do at this point to edit it then is we would say like global debug table edit event equals event. And if we just copy that in, I think it would work. Well, so there is one caveat, and that is we need to preserve the original string pointer, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, that's the only last thing we'd have to do, which is pretty easy for us to do, but we were intentionally not using that anywhere else in the debug system so that everything else would work properly. So yeah, we do need to do, you know, global debug table edit event dot excuse me, you know, dot GUID equals some preserved version of the actual of the actual GUID here. So yeah, not sure the best way to do that. You can see what I'm talking about, right? So the debug system just using the pointer, its original pointer that it was using. So in here where we store these events, the debug event, which is this thing, that gets written to the log, it has this GUID here, and we want to make sure that we preserve that GUID so that it can be used for checking, if that makes sense. But there's no way for us to use that here because we've replaced it with our own string that's a copy, so that if the DLL gets reloaded in between times when, you know, at some point during the run, the GUID is still valid. It still points to reasonable data. But when we do the edit event here, we need some way of restoring what that value is. And so inside the debug system itself, we would probably need inside the element to keep that information. And so inside an interaction, we could try to find a way to keep that value around, right? And I suppose the easiest thing to do is inside here, we would have, inside debug elements, we would have like original GUID or something like this, which we don't even really want to be a cav star, like, you know, note can never be printed or something like this. Because we don't know that it will ever, you know, might point into unloaded or something like that. So every time we see one of these, we can refresh the debug element with the latest GUID that we saw for that debug element. So we would know it in here, and then the question is just how would we actually get that GUID? And I guess the easiest thing to do here would just be to say, well, okay, I mean, just get the element from the event that we have, because we know that that should work. And so if we get that element from the event, which we can always get, and then just ask for the original GUID, that should be sufficient, in theory. And we'll want to clean this up tomorrow, but just in order to make that work, I think that's okay. So whenever we process one of these debug events, what we would want to do is we'd want to reset that original GUID. Like, we always want to be setting that because we always want it to be set to the latest one that it possibly can be set to. So like whenever we collate debug records, immediately after doing one of those queries, right, immediately after getting an element, we want to always reset the GUID every time. So every time we do get element from event, I guess anyone who does that, oops, that function doesn't exist in 4Coder yet. You can't call it, Casey. Okay. So anytime we call get element from event, anytime we do that, we would want to overwrite the GUID. So we'd want to say like the result original GUID equals whatever the event GUID is. So that just stores that pointer permanently. Get element from event. Are we, what, do we not have that here? I see. I see. Yes. Well, in that case, I will move it upwards. Quite a bit upwards, I suppose, because we're going to need this for other things as well. And then we should also be able to get rid of those IDs and stuff, right? I mean, I feel like we've got redundant systems in here now that we've got a stable GUID for things, but let's see. Maybe I should not do that. Maybe I should just put this in here so we can call it get element from event. There we go. And I definitely want to remove, I feel like the debug IDs thing, there's now just like too many different, those are like vestigial remains from a, different pass that we did over it. And so those should be removed now, right? I mean, those should not should not be there anymore. Oops, I copied the wrong one. There we go. That's the one I actually wanted. All right. So I think that's correct now. Unfortunately, yeah, I don't actually know if we'll be able to quite finish today, because I don't think now we have to do the final work of re-enabling the editing stuff after all this time, because I believe, although I don't actually know, but I believe since our stuff is not highlighted in that listing, that it never actually tries to do the edit. I could be wrong about that, but that's just my assumption. And so, I mean, I'll take a look here and see in the debugger where we're at, because maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I'm not super certain about that. So if we do toggle value and we look through here, I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint on that and see if we ever actually get there. Like that would be, you know, this. So we do actually get here. So let's take a look at whether this works. So we have event B32, it's set to 0. We have toggled it, so that's excellent, which is what we want. We then are going to overwrite the global debug tables event that's used for editing, this thing here. We're going to overwrite it with ourselves. So there it is, and we've got this GUID here, and this is the parsed GUID, which is not the one we want. So then we're going to overwrite that, hopefully, although that totally did not overwrite it. That just didn't work at all. So that's our problem. Probably, I'm guessing that I didn't read that properly. So this probably updates the GUID in the event itself. Does it? Let's find out. Yeah, it probably does. So I think what I probably need to do here is like just snap this Caristar original GUID. GUID. I'm just going to see if that helps me. There we go. See, why am I not? That's just bogus. So I gotta go see why that's happening. Sorry, I don't think there's gonna be any Q&A today, because I want to have this done, and it's almost what I wanted, but it's not quite there yet. So I want to take a look at get element from event, and I want to see what actually happens in here. See, that's what I expect to see, right? That's what I want to see. And so what I want to know is when I come down through here, why am I not, yeah, I don't need to see that, thank you. There it is. So it is setting that original GUID the way that I wanted, right? So that's good. But then for some reason, when I actually edit the debug element, that's not what I'm actually getting. Let's see why. Let's see why not. Toggle value. There we go. Bloop. So all right. Oh, duh. Because this itself will overwrite the GUID. Touché. Right, because now I'm going to actually overwrite that. So I need to have get element from event not be the person who overwrites that, because I only want to overwrite it if I actually got it from collation, right? And get element from event, I guess, is happening inside here. It doesn't do it for open data blocks, and so it only does it for these two here. Those are not editable. So I guess really at the moment anyway, can do something more like this, where we're just going to say, okay, you know, the original GUID equals the event GUID for now. And then when we're actually in collating the debug records, this one here, when we do a store event, the store event is actually the one that puts it in here. So the element, you know, original GUID equals the event GUID. Now, I don't know if that's sufficient or not, but we'll take a look. Looks okay. So let's try one more time. Am I getting a good GUID or not? And no, I'm not. Let's try that one more time. Oh, well, should probably have to recompile here. There we go. All right, run. And toggle. So let's take a look in here. When we actually get one of these, it was not able to find one. Because it doesn't know the original value. This is really not a problem at all. It's mostly just a, well, I only have an hour to do stuff, and it's really hard to do something as complicated as this system in that state. Right? We just need to clean up one more thing, and then we're done, which is that we now need to be able to track both the, you know, sort of common name of this thing and the sort of the more weird, the more weird version. And in order to figure out which debug element we're editing, that's a problem. Now, I suppose the other thing we could do there too is, since we're storing this in the debug element, we could just avoid actually looking it up. And instead of doing that, when we do the interactions could push the element instead, right? Instead of the event. But it would be nice to always be able to get back that original GUID value. I mean, that seems like something you would want to do anyway. So it feels like you want to be able to do that from the event. So maybe we really just don't want to actually do that rewrite there. I mean, that could actually be, we may want to just actually have that still point to the GUID. So instead, when we do store event, right, like what we were doing before is we rewrite the GUID to be the event get name. And we could just say, like, all right, we're not going to do that anymore. We'll do that at print time or some other, you know, some other thing that's similar to that. So that when we actually go to do one of these and we want to look up the value, we will actually get the value, right, like we do in this case. So yeah. So that actually works just fine. So now we can actually edit these values okay. Or we don't actually have editors for non-Boolean values yet, I believe. No. These are not listed as Booleans, so I can't edit them yet. I don't know that we haven't done any edits for other sorts of things. But all right, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm reasonably happy with that. And so if we actually go change these other ones that are in fact Booleans to be Booleans, which all of these actually are, or almost all of them are, then we should be able to edit all of them, I should think. Oh dear. I do not know why that was bad. It looks like the graphics driver was not particularly happy with our textures on that particular run. I suppose that's not surprising. We're still using that kind of way that we did not determine was actually safe. So yeah. All right. So I'm okay with that. Oh, I forgot. Okay. Yeah, I forgot about the particle system. I forgot that it was using the hero's head. And he spews out particles that are facing the direction that he's facing, which is even weirder. All right, well, that's fine. And then in theory, now we can edit all of these things if we want to write little editors for them, which is kind of crazy. So what happens if we switch the rendering type? So if I go now into Win32, let's see if we can edit from both. Debug value. So these now, like pause and that stuff, are actually... oh, but global rendering type is not actually a Boolean. So we would actually need a real one of those. We can only switch between the two OpenGL ones if we call it a Boolean. We wouldn't be able to switch to the third value. So that's something we would have to address. So for example, we can switch to that, which renders through software. Or switch back. Yeah, there we go. So we're getting there. I guess I should call it because we're already over time. And we also probably need to fix our sRGB so that we don't get the washed out version when we switch to software. But otherwise, I think we're okay. Global pause seems grumpy, though. I wonder why. All right. Well, we're getting there, but we still got a ways to go. Wonder why global pause is unhappy. Anyone got any ideas on that? Global pause. I guess we haven't done anything with them out. So P, we had a toggle on P. Oh, you know what? One thing that is a little bit odd is really the edit at the moment would be sticky. So we would also want to make sure that every time through we clear out the debug event. So whenever we start debugging, like when we do a debug update, basically, which I assume is just, anytime we're in debug start, and, well, actually, I guess it's just the debug frame, and in here, every time we come through here, we would want to stop the edit, I believe. So, whenever we get the global debug table, right, we would do global debug table, edit event. We'd want to do that. Because we don't want the edit to keep applying. We wouldn't really hit any bugs with that at the moment, but we don't know. So I don't really know why that one's happening. Everyone else seems to work okay. But I don't actually know. Yeah, I don't actually know why that one's not okay. But it's definitely not, right? Yeah, because it immediately switches, if you set pause, it immediately switches itself off of pause. And let me see if that actually works. So it still works if you do just P, but that's it. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not sure why that is, but we'll have to take a look at why, because that must be, there might be some problem with the edit, which is, we only just got it working, so that makes sense, but I'm not sure why only the global pause version would be broken, but everyone else would be working correctly. That's obviously a little bit odd. So we should take a look at why. One other thing, trying to think if, I thought there was one other thing that I might want to do. Well, I guess we can do everything else that we were going to do tomorrow, so I think that's fine. But for the time being, I think maybe I will switch the, well, you know what we could do? It would be interesting to see, because we haven't switched in a while. If we have full optimizations on, I wonder, it's probably fun to switch between the two renderers in that case, right? So it was worth doing OpenGL, right? I mean, for our situation, because with all the ground chunks are really the thing that kill the software renderer. Because we're drawing tons of them on top of each other. We can't. They're all in the pink thing at the moment. Can we turn off the ground chunks? Now that I think about it too, we have like outlines, recompute, unchange, and all that stuff. But we don't really have a way to turn off the ground chunks, do we? We should have a way to turn off ground chunks. I feel like. World mode. Let's take a look. Ground chunks. Where are the ground chunks? There we go. So when we render these ground chunks, this is the updating for the ground chunks. Guess we could say if ground chunks on, something like that. You know what you could almost do too? Well, no, I won't bother with that. So where's the rendering for the ground chunks though? Where's the rendering? Because that's just the updating. That's for filling the ground chunks. But there's got to be somewhere that we render them, yeah? Do we update them after we render them? We do. Well, that's surprising. But I guess that's what we do. All right, so if this is global ground chunks on, don't know what happened here. There we go. Indent. And I don't really know why the global alpha, I guess because we're setting the global alpha. Yeah, I guess because we set the global alpha differently, maybe something like this. Then we have ground chunk updating. I'm going to keep all of this inside there. There we go. So if I then made this guy, you know, global ground chunks on. How is that, oops, how is that an undeclared identifier? Ah, again! All right, so that gets me a lot, it would seem. If I accidentally hit load file instead of switch buffer, I create a new buffer. I should basically just make sure that doesn't happen. Because I can do that in my own config, just make sure that can never happen. It's probably a good thing. All right, so in here, yeah, where I've got those ground chunks happening, then if I want to, I should be able to say that this is a debug value. Okay. So let's run. And, you know, I just realized I did not actually put it anywhere. I need to put it in the old menu. So that should be in here, presumably, right? I don't know why I keep saying the process cannot access the file because it's being used by another process. Permission denied. Right. So now if I'm here, I can turn them on or I can turn them off, right? And then if I come in here, I should be able to say like, okay, I want to render in software, so there we are. And then I can turn, yeah, it either on or off. Good deal. All right, I'm happy with that. Got a ways to go here, but at least it's starting to converge. I feel like we need to clean out a bunch of like the crufty debug ID stuff from the system now, because if we have a particular GUID now that we know we're using everywhere, then we don't need to have like multiple ways that that can be edited. So I think that's probably okay. We don't have time for any Q&A today, so we'll have to if you had any pressing cues, you can go ahead and queue them up for tomorrow, if that makes sense. And we should have a Q&A tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down and go here. Thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org. It comes with the source code. You can also go to the forums to ask questions. You can support us on Patreon. You can go to the tweet bot, which has a schedule. That's pretty much, you know, that's what you should do. It's all right there. And also there's this little Live Now button, which if you refresh the page at any time, it will show you the latest countdown to when we're live again, which will be tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Hope to see you here for that. I want to kind of clean up the rest of that debug system, so I'm anxious to kind of get all of that buttoned up so we don't have to really think about it anymore. Now that we've got edits in, I think we just need to put the profiler back together. That's the only other feature thing that we need before we can call it quits. So that's about it. I hope you guys have fun programming this evening, and I will catch you guys tomorrow on stream. Until then, take it easy and have, I guess I'll see you on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.